Welcome back to Balance Redefined Radio. I'm Connie Sokol, your host, and today I am beyond thrilled to share with you this wonderful guest. We are in for a treat, I'm telling you. So fun, so delightful, and so real. It's J. Scott Savage. I feel like one of those announcers, J. Scott Savage, and commonly known as Scott Savage, right? Yeah, there's gonna be little things shooting out of a cannon. He is with us today, going to talk about writing, about the details, the back end, backstory, the things you don't want to know about the writing process, and also applying it to anybody's dream of something that you want to move forward on, but you're feeling those roadblocks internally and externally. What does that look like? And then we're going to talk about keeping family in the mix. How do you balance both this dream you want to accomplish, but then having your family come along for the ride, right? And be all in. So we're going to talk about that today. First, let me just give you a quick bio. If you have been in a cave for the last 20 years, you're not sure who this is. He actually, and I love this part the best, he published his first book when he was 38. 38 people. See, Julia Child, she was clicking in her 60s. That's when she started, right? But he's since then published 18 novels for both adults and children. And we're going to talk about that switch over in just a little bit. And he's received many awards and also the love and adoration of many fans. He also works full-time as a marketing and sales exec in the software industry. He's a father of 4 and yummy, a grandfather of 6 with 7 numbers on the way. And he is a husband to the most amazing woman in the world. And we're going to talk about that too, because I meet her at the grocery store. We happen to live in a kind of neighboring area. And I have some of the best conversations with her. She is incredible. And the two of you are a dynamic duo. So without further ado, let us move forward. First and foremost, I want to just jump right into what happened at age 38 that you started with publishing your first novel. Of course, that's not when you started writing, but what happened? What was the catalyst there?
Sure. So you talk to a lot of authors who say, I knew growing up I wanted to be an author. And looking back, there were lots of things where, I loved creative writing. I loved making up stories, all those things. But I never had the author visit that I do at schools. So I never had anyone tell me, you can be an author. And so it was kind of like that dream, of like, oh, I want to be a race car driver or an astronaut, whatever, depending on what was popular at the time, but it never occurred to me that I could do that. And so I've been in sales and marketing for a long time. I kind of climbed that corporate ladder and two things kind of happened at about the same time. One was I became a CEO of an internet company, and that's like a long story all of itself. And it was kind of the best of times, the worst of times. We sold the company for over $100 million one day, a 7-month-old company. The next day, the market crashed. There was a lot of stress. And I went to a conference of CEOs, and these were some of the top people at the time in the dot-com world. And I met them and some of their spouses and stuff. And I don't want to put a blanket statement, but in general, I didn't want to be one of them. Their focus, lots of family issues and for most of them, it was really clear that their company was far more important than their family. And that just kind of hit me a little bit. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Where do I want to be? And at the same time, because of the stress, I started writing a story. And I had never submitted a book. I'd never been to a writing conference. At the time, there was no, like you can go on now and blog how to, publish a book or whatever. That wasn't there. So I started writing some chapters of a high-tech thriller just as a way of stress relief and something that I enjoyed doing, and I had some friends and family who encouraged me and said, hey, are you going to write more? You're going to write more. And I finished it and I got done. And my older sister, who I love, and she's published a couple of books, Deanne Blackhurst, said to me, so what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this book? And are you going to get it published? And I said, I would have no idea how to do that. And she pointed me to Covenant, who's a small Utah publisher. And she said, hey, they're doing mysteries and thrillers. And I said, but it's not Mormon, And she said, no, they're doing straight mysteries. So I sent it to them and I went on with my life. And 6 months later, one of my kids came in. They're like, Dad, there's someone on the phone from like a publisher. And I'm like, wait, what? And that was the way I heard. They called me and said, hey, we read your story. We really like it. We'd like to publish it. And so it's not the typical story of jumping into publishing, but it was a dream. You talk about dreams, I didn't realize it was a dream that I had had all along until that dream started to come true just a little bit. And then I was like, wow, this is really what I want to do.
Oh, and I love the way you said that until it started to come true just a little bit, we kind of think it's got to be a J.K. Rowling, it's got to be something that's going to knock the world, right? And so we're just going to, white knuckle until we find that thing. But I love, it's almost like an accidental success where you're doing a little of what you love,
Right.
and you kept what mattered most first. That to me resonates so big, is that you weren't afraid of, I'm going to have to give up my dream if I focus on having a good, healthy family. I'm going to focus on that first, and those doors and things kind of fell into play. I love that. So what happened with that after you got that first success? Did you start saying, I'm going to carve out time now for this particular thing? Or was it still, I got to keep the day job and do this with my left toe?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of dreams, again, people kind of come back and they talk about, I want to be a full-time writer. And I think what most people don't realize, and I've had a lot of lunches where I say, I don't want to burst that bubble for you. But there are very few people, unless either your cost of living is really low, you're a newlywed couple.
Golden pond.
Yeah, right, exactly, But for the most part, most authors have another job. And so, whether it's there's a lot of moms who are like, I'm balancing my kids and I'm balancing, my house and a job and all these things I've got going on. And I was in the same situation. We left Silicon Valley at that point, came to Utah, which was, my wife and I both felt like this was a really important move. And I started writing, but it was still, it's like, okay, I've got a 9-to-5 job. So I either write early in the morning, and for me, I'm kind of a night owl. And so I would write later at night. And the dream was always there about doing more. But I remember I'd been living here in Spanish Fork for about, maybe about 9 months. And a guy in our ward, he's like, so you write books? And I said, I do. And he goes, do you mind me asking, like how much do you make per book? And I told him, and he kind of looks at me and he's like, and how long does it take to write a book? And I told him, and he's like, why do you do that?
The dirty little secret about being an author, right?
That's exactly it. There are the J.K. Rowlings, but for most authors, and fortunately my income has come up over the years, but it hasn't ever been that one home run. And I guess in a way, I mean, I'd love to have, been like Stephanie Meyers or J.K. Rowling or whatever, but I also look back at my writing talent or lack thereof at that point, and I'm sort of glad that my first book wasn't put under that level of scrutiny. I don't know how my ego would have held up under that.
Yes. Well, and you bring up such a good point. I think there is this idea in anyone's mind of any dream. They just want to do A plus B equals C. And then that shows that they're successful, right? Then we prove to family and friends that we really are a success. But you are exactly spot on. If anyone out there has read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, he talks about that he said, those people who get that one hit wonder, pray for them, because the rest of us have to actually learn our craft. And just like you said, you're not under such horrible scrutiny, and you're not under such pressure to keep producing at such a high level. That way you're able to develop. And speaking of, it sounded like you started in the adult genre and then kind of switched to kids. So talk about that, because it sounds like it was a bit of a journey that way.
Well, so this was a funny thing. I tell people the success that I've had in writing for kids is mostly because of giving myself permission to fail. And what happened was I would go do author things. We have a great community of authors here, and so I'd go do events, and I had friends who wrote kids' books, and most of the kids' books had some fantasy elements, which I loved. That's what I loved to read. Harry Potter was really big at the time, and so I would love to write them. My brother would ask me, hey, when are you going to write them? My younger brother, who, we played the video games and watched all the movies, and I can't. I write adult books and I write like thrillers and mysteries. I can't write fantasy and I can't write kids' books. And I was actually, in the Denver airport, and it was for a business trip, and I got a call from a good friend of mine, And he was so excited that he had signed a contract with Shadow Mountain. And I have no idea who that was, but he said, yeah, they've done, Fablehaven with Brandon Mole, and they've done 11 Thumbs with Obersky, and they do tours and they do posters and they do, book trailers, all this amazing stuff, right? And so, I think all of us, like, you have someone who's a friend who calls and gives you good news. And there's the angel on the one shoulder that's right.
Yes.
Hey, God, that's so awesome, There's a little like devil on there's a little, it's like, oh God, I wish, I could get something like that. But I thought, I don't write kids books and I don't write fantasy. So as cool as that would be, that's not what I do. So that night, I got to my hotel. I had a business meeting in the morning, and you know how you have like kind of a story and it's in your head. And
Yes.
I'd had this idea that I thought if I'd ever tried to write a fantasy, which I knew I couldn't, what would happen if you had your main character be a boy or a girl in a wheelchair? If you had someone with a disability, how would that change the story? Well, these characters were talking to me, and I was like, just stop that. I can't write that. I know I can't. And finally, it was about 2 a.m, and I was like, I need to go to sleep. I've got to get out. So I thought, well, here's what I will do. I will sit down, open my, my big heavy laptop at the time, and at the hotel desk, and I will try to write one chapter. And once I see that I can't write that, then my voices will go away, and I can just, focus on what I'm doing. So I sat down and I started writing, and I wrote, and this boy in this wheelchair, and these kids wanted to push him down the stairs, and he imagined this world that he called Far World. And at a certain point, I looked over at the desk, and there was something there on the side of this hotel room desk. And I'm like, what is that? And I kind of reached out, and it was a little line of light. And I'm like, where is that light coming from? And I looked behind me, and the hotel curtains behind me were open about an inch, and the sun was shining through. And I looked down at my watch, and it was 7:30, and I'd been writing for a little over 5 hours, and I'd written the first 5,000 words that ultimately became Far World. And even then, I would ask my wife all the time, like, if this is bad, tell me. In fact, I published it with Shadow Mountain, but there's a really terrible story that I wanted to show it to Covenant, who I'd published the other things with. But I was really worried that they might say, well, this is one of our authors. We'll just say, yeah, it's fine. So I sent it to them under a pen name. I just submitted it. Well, then I forgot that I had emailed it under a pen name. So later, when Shadow Mountain had accepted it and everything was good, I called my editor at Covenant, good friend of mine, Kirk Shawn. I said, hey, Kirk, I want to let you know that I'm going to be publishing this Far World book with Shadow Mountain. And I started to tell him about it. He said, that sounds really familiar. I've read that. And I said, no one's read it. I just said it to Shadow Mountain. He's like, no. He goes, I got that in an email. And I went, oh my gosh, I forgot. And he's like, yeah, I emailed you back like 6 times. Wasn't it like, it was like my grandfather's name that I'd used, And I was like, I am so sorry. And there was a little contention at first, like, were you trying to trick us? And I'm like, no, I really thought that it would be bad. And so I didn't want you guys to say, oh yeah, this is nice, and pat me on the head.
Placate you.
Yeah, but that ended up being what I love doing. And not that I might not go back and write an adult book at some point, but I just discovered that for me, that older middle grade, that kind of magical time where kids are discovering so many things like that's just the heart of what I do. So that's what I write now.
Do you know what I love about your story is I think this is so true to your true self too. I think that's one of the hardest personally genres to write because you have to still be in that magical state of mind. You have to think like a child, but write adultish, and you cannot condescend to them. And being able to do that, not very many people can do that and do it well because it doesn't come off. So for you to be able to tap into who you really are and then share that from such a genuine place, that's talk about, a writer's authenticity. I love that. And another thing that I love that you shared, for those that are listening, they're going to so relate to this, where you said, I knew that I couldn't write that. I knew that I could not do that. I think there's a part in all of us that is that rational creature, the rational angel that says, would you just back to your 9-to-5 job and just put this away, please, and be an adult, right? Focus on paying the mortgage, right? But there's part of us that keeps fighting to come up and saying, this is part of me too. This is part of living. So I love that you acknowledge that. And then the other piece I love is you said, and I just sat down and wrote. I love that you just said, I'm just going to do one chapter. I know when I'm working with women, helping them do the same thing, I will say the same thing. I'll say, just put your bum in a chair and do 100 words. Just do that. Just do that. And then walk away. Just walk away. No one has to see it. And I love that. I love that you just allowed yourself to open the door and then see what was behind it and not be afraid of that. And I also can so relate to the angel and the devil of when something good happens to someone else. I think everyone listening can relate to that. That just happened to me last night. A friend got a speaking request. And I'm like, well, where was that in my life, right? And I went, okay, now I feel really bad.
Exactly.
So, you know, it happens. So I love this. This is the evolution of being a writer. It's not a skipping steps. It's this journey of opening yourself up and learning about who you are and what you really want and how you can do it. So I'm loving this. So let's kind of segue just for a bit with, you made that journey, you crossed over, you found this group, which is so beautiful, and keeping the door open for any future adult books. I love that. I can't wait. But I love what you've been able to do with keeping this in pace with your family. This has been such an amazing gift that you and your family have, as well as such a great example to authors everywhere. Because I get this question all the time, especially as a woman, where we have something added on, where with all the kids and everything like that, for us to actually take, you know, our own personal time and then to use it for writing is like, you know, unheard of, right? But it's changing, which is so wonderful. So talk us through what your wife's response was to this, and then how did you guys consciously decide we're going to do this together and this is what it's going to look like, or did you let that unfold? Tell us how that developed.
Well, so I mean, the first thing, again, when I published my first book, it was like, okay, that's it. You know, I'm getting a cabin by the lake. You know, because you have no idea how much you make as an author. Like, again, there just weren't numbers there. I remember like I went to the library and there was Writer's Market, which was mostly just listings. And then there was like fiction, and all the fiction was, you know, you publish a book and you go on tour and you're rich. And so, you know, our first kind of conversation was, well, am I going to, you know, is this what I'm going to do full time? And we both agreed, we're like, financially, we don't want the stress. I mean, I'd done some startups and things in the past, you know, and it's like, I would rather, we both felt like, let's make sure that financially we're in a good place. And that was great, because once we realized how much authors make and stuff, and again, not that you can't make more, but in general, it's a hobby that pays for itself for the most part. So that was great. We moved out here to Utah. I started doing events. People would come and ask you to teach a class or write. And I found that was something that I enjoyed and something that I did well. And my wife would generally come to me, not always, because our kids were a little bit younger at the time, but especially as our oldest kids were in high school and they could watch the younger kids, we would try to do that more. And it kind of became a date night thing. Well, then as I moved into writing for kids, there's a lot more, like authors will say to me, well, I just want to write a good story. That's all I want to do. I don't want to have to deal with the rest of it, you know? And it's like, well, I mean, that would be nice, but you know, there's not, I mean, there's podcasts like we're doing here, you know, with Shadow Mountain, there's a tour that's somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks, you know, there's reaching out to librarians, there's schools contacting us and stuff. And so one of the things that we decided ourselves, and this has really worked out well, and it's something that I talk to a lot of any kind of creative person about, is that a lot of times you have to find that creative time for yourself, like we talked about, right? So you're like, okay, my family's here, my job's here, you know, my maybe church responsibilities or whatever over here. So here is where my creativity, my writing time is. Well, if you continue to keep those separated, and there are times when you need that, but if you keep those separated, then if one starts to grow, you know, if your church responsibilities get bigger, or your family responsibilities, or your work, or whatever, in this case, your writing, if that starts to grow, if there's not an overlap, it starts to push things out. And I talked to a guy one time who was a professional golfer for a while, and he told me some crazy statistics of the number of professional golfers who ended up getting divorced when they went on tour. And I've seen similar things, not necessarily divorce, although sometimes with writing, where as writers become more successful, their personal relationship suffers. And so we made a decision, you know, I don't, all of my events that are booked, I typically book through my wife. She keeps the calendar, she coordinates. It's nice for me because she can say, oh, you'll love this presentation that he does on this. And she can also be the one that says, yes, here's how much this costs, you know, and if they're uncomfortable with that, you know, then that's totally fine, you know, but she does all that. But we talk about all the books that we're writing, you know, I'm constantly discussing. I just turned in on Monday a new book, and you know, I'll tell you about that. But one of the issues that we had is I took a week off work because this was due on Monday, and I had some kind of hard editing to do. And I would have times where like suddenly it just dawned on me, I'm like, okay, this whole section of the book doesn't work. Like this is not going to work because I didn't do this, I didn't set this up and stuff. And we talk about it, and she'd listen, you know, and give me some advice and stuff. And then just talking it through with her, I'd be like, well, but you know, if I did this, this could come back and work. So she does editing with me. We do events together. And I will tell you that especially with a situation where you've had, you know, authors who have ended up in bad situations, you know, at conferences or been accused of things or whatever, it's nice to be able to say, yeah, you know, when I go to conferences, my wife is always there. Not that I need her to like protect me from anything, but just that I think people look and say, oh, this is a married, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's a package deal.
It is a package deal, yes. So that's really what, for us, what's happened is it's great that my writing career has grown, and that's been a wonderful thing, but it hasn't grown at the expense of my family life. You know, I've got them all involved. One of my favorite things is I have a little, a routine we do, and it's been tougher as we've had kids that are, you know, gone, but we try to get as many as are here. When I finish a book, I invite all my family in, and everyone writes the last words. So everyone, you know, I dictate what it is, and they type out the end of the book, you know. And my six or seven, gosh, I think he's 7 now. He's starting 2nd grade. So my 7-year-old grandson, he came in and he's like, Grandpa, are we going to do the words today? And I hadn't said, but he knew that the book was being turned in. And so I think that having whatever your dream is with your family life, when you can do it, is a really positive thing.
I love that. And I love the intentional behaviors and choices behind that, because it can get away from you before you even know it. And this is man or woman. And I think that's so beautiful, the intention behind everything that you've done. I know that we've done that same thing, that my kids, they would, every time I'd finish a book, we'd go to dinner, I'd have them drive with me to go and take it to the publisher, and we'd like celebrate. And when something came out, I had a little orange thing on bestseller, we'd be like,
oh yeah.
I'm cooking all the time, right? So I'm like, okay, let's go to dinner. Let's go to dinner, right? I loved it. And they would go with me when I would go to places. They'd exchange the money. They'd talk to people. And I was just talking to a friend about this the other day. I said, you know, when you share, everybody in the family shares their talents, and not at the expense of the family, but when they share, they see you fail, they see you succeed, they see you deal with situations, they see you, and then they learn. My sweet daughter, who is now on a church mission, she's in France, and we were talking about how her early days of exchanging money, of talking to customers, of selling the books, of taking things to, you know, when I'd speak at Education Week, which I still do, but we'd take and we'd lug all this stuff and all of these things. It's taught them, these are business principles, this is what you do, these are good, healthy ways to have relationships and business and relationships of trust. So all of this matters, and I love, it's a beautiful vehicle for a family to come together and celebrate one another. And I can't tell you how many kids of mine started wanting to write a book. Now they've grown up into their own things, right? But like at 8 and 9, they wanted to start writing a book and wanted to paint or do their drawings. And it sparked their ability to seeing their dreams.
I think that is such an important thing. You talked about, like, moms especially. You don't hear dads doing this as much, but you hear moms all the time saying, my family is suffering because I'm doing this and I'm not making enough money to justify it or whatever. And the things they don't realize is your kids, just like you said, your kids are seeing you live your dream. They're seeing you use the talents that you have been given and fill the measure of your creation. And maybe they have cereal for dinner some nights, or maybe the yard isn't as well taken care of, or maybe, the house isn't as clean, but they're not going to remember those things. They're going to remember that you lived your dream, and that's going to give them the confidence to live their dreams. And I just think that is huge. So I totally applaud you for that.
So, and you know what's beautiful is that I think doing this as a family and involving a family, it's made me a more efficient writer, because I know when they come home from school, then that's it.
Right.
And I have to, when they're gone, even if I only had an hour, maybe 3 times a week, or if I had half an hour in the morning that I could get up, man, I was prepared. While I'm putting in wash, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, that scene, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is what I need to get accomplished when I sit down. It made me, that's how I've written 17 books, because I'm in my kids.
Oh,
because I know you only have this much time. You better make it worth your while. So these additional gifts and benefits that you wouldn't necessarily see. And I love this. So kind of segueing off of those kind of surprise benefits you would not maybe look for or recognize, kind of in that, going back to that failure aspect, I want to talk about that for a minute, because people know cerebrally that they're going to expect failure, whether they're pursuing a writing dream or a business dream or whatever it might be. But it's always a shock when it happens to you, and it can really cut your legs out from under you. How did you deal with failure?
So there's a story that I like to share. And this is, I had just come back from my mission. I was living in California at the time. I'd come back from serving an LDS mission. And I was going to a community college, and it was right before school was going to start. So kind of limited classes. So I was kind of figuring out what I could register for. And this was before you could do anything online, right? So I'm there.
I remember those days.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The ad drop cards. Oh yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So I'm getting everything done, and I saw a PE class that was a cross-country class. And I thought, well, I like to run. I mean, I haven't run in 2 years, but I like to run, so I'll sign up for that. So I did. I signed up for it, and it was at the end of the school day. And so I went out to where everyone was, and immediately I realized that something was like not quite right. Like these are like, it's like walking into a stable of thoroughbreds, all these men and women that all look like world-class runners, and here I haven't run for 2 years, and I've got whatever my cheap run. Yeah, exactly. And I discovered pretty quickly that what this was not a PE class I'd signed up for, but the actual college cross-country team. And worse than that, this was a team that had won the community college California state championship like 16 years in a row. And I was like, oh, my bad. You talked about the drop card. I'm like, I will bring you the drop card, and the coach said, no, come run with us. And I said, no, I haven't run for 2 years. And he said, that's fine. We'd love to have you. I mean, it's not a big deal. And I thought, well, I'm signed up. I mean, I hate to drop something. So I went and I ran. And the very first practice they had, they said, okay, we're going to do 6 miles of 5 sevens. And I'm like, what are 5 sevens? And they said, well, you run a 5-minute mile, and then you run a 7-minute mile as rest, and then you run a 5-minute mile, and you do this for 6 miles. And I was like, I have never run a 5-minute mile in my life. I don't even think I can run a 7-minute mile, And so I ran, and I came in dead last of everyone. I mean, they were all done and drinking their Gatorades when I got done. And I said, well, this was fun. But he said, no, come back. And somehow he convinced me to constantly come back, And so I came in last every practice. And then we had our first multi-school meet, and there were like 8 schools there. And I thought, well, surely I won't come in last. There has to be someone in these 8 schools that's slower than I am. No, I came in dead last. Yeah. And so I really wanted to drop out, but he kept convincing me to come. And, if this was like a book or a movie, there'd be like some magical ending, where the star runner drops out. No. I came in last every single race, every practice, I had terrible leg cramps. I mean, all the stuff, right? And so the end of the season, we're done. And I was like, okay, thanks guys. They had a little party and I was done. And my dad said, hey, there's a 5-mile church race coming up, like a stake run, or no, I think maybe it was community. Anyhow, it was some sort of 5-mile race. And would you come in and run this with me? And I said, no, I am done, and
humiliation is over.
Exactly. So he bribed me with something, and I went and ran. It was a Halloween race, and it was a 5-mile race. And I started running, and I was doing good. I was passing people and I was feeling good. And I started to push it a little bit more and a little bit more. And by the end of the race, I came in second place, just a hair behind the first place runner. And it was, my pace was just under 6 minutes for the 5 miles. It was, much faster than I'd ever run. And what I discovered was that all the time that I thought I had been failing, all of these failures were actually part of succeeding. And I've had the same exact experiences in my writing. I mean, I launched my Far World series. I was so excited because this was it. Like I had made it finally, and just as the series was going to come out, the recession hit. And Shadow Mountain has said, you could not have picked a worse time to start a series with us, and so that series went off and on, really did not do well. And I had quit my job to go market full time, which was a huge, I thought, mistake. Got in a lot of debt, discovered later on that was actually building up a foundation for everything that I've done. And that it was a big reason why Shadow Mountain had me come back later. But then I got a deal with Harper, and it was a 3-book, 6-figure deal, national publisher, big agent. I got all the recognition. It was a Junior Library Guild selection and an Amazon Book of the Month and a Barnes & Noble Select Book, starred Kirkus Review, like everything you'd want, right? So I thought, well, now I have made it. But their marketing department had already decided what they were going to market, and that wasn't one of the books. And so that series did not sell well. They actually had added a 4th book with all the recognition, but with no marketing, no one bought that book, and there were just these times when I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. Like, I have failed. There are lots of times, because I teach a lot, and there were times where you just think, why am I bothering trying to teach people when they must be looking at me and going, God, this person can't even succeed themselves. Why are they trying to tell us? But again, as I look back at that, so many of the things that I thought were failures, so many of the times that, I thought, well, that was such a dumb thing that I did. I look back and I'm like, I'm not J.K. Rowling, but I have built up a pretty big following. I've gotten pretty successful. And again, I believe that it's because of all those failures along the way.
I love what you bring up, and that it seems to me what you're talking about is this perception of success. Again, we're back to that A plus B equals C, but it's not like that. It's not that simple equation. It's a calc equation. It's over this to the 4th power, divided by, it's a journey because we're becoming. And you're exactly right. Those things that we think they were just, they didn't have any ROI, they didn't do anything for us, that they actually do come into play. I just had that experience recently where I wrote a book 7 years ago, right? And it's just been like sitting there. Everybody has one, right? Yeah. It's your favorite. It's the little baby. And you're like, oh, I want to dress it cute. And I love that one, but it's not going anywhere. And then I was teaching women how to do writing. And I can totally understand what you're saying. I'm teaching this and I know things, but I'm thinking, what am I doing with that? And I had to take my own advice. And then I reached out to a boutique publisher and she said, yes, I absolutely want to publish that. So I'm on that road. And it's like a full circle where you do this, but then it actually is all part of that, again, package deal. It's all part of that journey. And there isn't any skipping those steps. So it looks like some people do. There isn't any skipping. You get it on I will say it's like having a child. You either get it on the beginning or the middle or the back end. I mean, you just get it somewhere in the line. So I love what you're sharing because I think people listening would not know that about your story and know about those times when you were hitting those lows and still moving forward. I think there was a quote from Jay-Z that said, the genius of what we did, with Beyonce, I think, the genius of what we did is that we kept going. We didn't stop. We didn't just let those things, those setbacks say, okay, I'm done. That it's almost that, the compound effect, where you're putting the pennies in, pennies, and then boom, it starts getting traction. Did you find that that's what happened for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, I mean, there are like I just had a good friend who recently just posted to Facebook and she said, my dream has always been publishing, but I've found that I've hung on to that dream because I felt like I had to, and I've got these other things. So I want to say that there are people who find other dreams. It's not like, okay, if you stop this one dream that you're a failure, but it was that traction for me. This is something that I've loved doing. even when I thought I shouldn't be teaching, I loved teaching. You know, when I've gone on tours, I've had these, wow, just, I had one experience where I call kids up. So I'm typically like talking to like 2nd through 6th graders, right? And right, and it's hard. You're tired because you do 4 assemblies a day, but you get these connections. So I'm at this one school, and my wife wasn't with me this time. I called her afterwards, but I'm at the school, and I kind of look at kids because I call some kids up where we do a thing where we make a story. So you have a hero and goal and obstacles, and they come up and we talk about how to get through a story. Well, this was 3rd through 6th grade, and I noticed one boy who was sitting kind of off to the side, and he had kind of a lot of teachers around him, and he was much bigger than the other students, and he was watching very intently, but his expression never changed. You know, didn't smile, didn't laugh. You know, just watching. And so I just kind of watch him out of the corner of my eye. Well, when I called up, I said, do I have anyone who wants to be an obstacle? You know, has a great idea for an obstacle. And his hand went up, and I thought, well, I'm going to call on him. So I called him up, and right away I could see the teachers, like 2 teachers kind of going around whispering, and they're kind of looking over. I'm like, no, we're good. Everything's fine here. You know, we're good. So they kind of sat down, and so I got the first obstacle, and I came to him. He was the second obstacle. And I said, you know, do you have an obstacle that you want to be? And he just looked at me and he said, obstacles get in our way. And that's what I taught him. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I said, would you like to be like a monster or a dragon? And he said, a pickle. So I'm like, awesome. Okay. So we had a giant pickle who came, and, you know, they had to go cast, and the kids clapped. They loved it. They laughed. You know, I mean, it went great. And when we get done, the kids will come and help us. And I give each of the helpers a poster, and the other kids can come and get them to sign in, but the kids who come and help me get a poster. And I handed him this poster, and he just took it, and he's like running his hand across it like this, you know, and just kind of touching it. And he goes back to the teachers, and he's just like beaming, and he's holding this and touching it. And the other kids are like, you know, talking to him, and the teachers, and man, it's got me, you know. In fact, I got done, and you know, I finished, and everything was great, and I got in my rental car, and I called my wife, and I'm driving, and I'm cool, you know, and I'm like, hey, so I had this experience, and I started to tell her, and man, I had to pull over. I just lost it, you know. And it's just like, just this kind of moment, you know. And so I think that you really do, you have lots of moments that are hard, but then you have these other moments, you know, where you get a tiny little taste of what your talent is doing for other kids. And wow, it just, you know.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I love that you shared that, because you keep the core of what matters and what you're doing. And that's always seeing people. It's not just checking off another thing and it's another assembly, it's another day. You are truly being present with them, because that person, just like us, we were influenced by other people, and they looked at us and they saw us, and we're handing that baton and we're passing that baton. And you have no idea the seeds that you're planting with just the little things that you're doing that seem so normal. I will get emails or texts from people from 10 years who's heard something 10 years ago or read something. And this is not that because me, magical me, I'm talking about this is what we all do. We all have spread seeds, and we don't know unless someone takes a moment and says, this mattered to me. And look at the way you have influenced all of these kids, that you've opened this file drawer, especially in this day and age of sit inside and twitch your thumb, in this ability to have imagination and to validate you can do something. You could be a pickle. You can imagine something, and it's okay. I love that. I can't even tell you how jealous I am of these kids in those assemblies. I can't even imagine how much fun and how wonderful that must have been. Oh, I would have loved that as a kid.
Well, you know, what you're saying about those seeds, it's the one thing that I share with anyone who's creative. And I don't care if you know, maybe you self-published a book and it got read by 5 people, or you wrote a short story, or you wrote a memoir of your family, or you painted a painting, whatever it might be. People need to understand that their art, their talent, those are changing lives, and they don't always get to see it right away.
Yes.
But they absolutely change lives, and most of the time you don't get to see it. And that is better than any bestseller list or award or, anything. Is just having that one kid who you discover, right? I'll tell you one more story. And like you said, we have, everyone has them. This is not us being, special or whatever, but I got an email one time, and it was from that first book, that Far World book that I didn't think I could write, that first book. And I got an email, and it was from a 16-year-old boy, and he was in the hospital for an eating disorder. And he'd been there for several weeks. And he said, I just want to tell you, you don't know who I am. I've never met you. I mean, I don't know how he got my books there in I think it was in Pittsburgh. But he had these books, and he said, I just wanted to tell you that I really feel like you have saved my life. He said, this has been a really hard thing for me. And I have your first 3 Far World books on my nightstand. I'm reading the first one. And usually it's late at night when I start to just get anxious and stressed. And I open up your book and I read about Marcus and Kaisha. And when I read about what they're doing, I know that I can accomplish these things. And he's like, I just felt like I had to reach out to you and say thank you, and that's one kid, but people change lives. Art changes lives. Creativity changes lives. There's a reason that we've been given those talents.
Oh, that is so tender and so spot on. And that everyone in their sphere can do that. We have potential individually to do that. And like you said, we will probably not, 98% of the time, no. But like when I do TV, and they said, for every comment that we get, that means that reflects about 15,000 people's views. So one little comment, you can imagine how many people have been, affected positively. We could go on forever. I could do a part 2 on creativity and helping our kids with that. We look forward to that. I'll rope you into that later.
That's right.
People want to get a hold of you, like anyone listening, and like the stories that you've shared. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So my website is jscottsavage.com. I've got a new book coming out fall of 2020 called The Wonderland Diaries. That's really fun story about what if Wonderland was a real place. And there's talking about, kids, this deals a lot with dyslexia. So I'm really excited about this one. On Facebook, J. Scott Savage. I love having people friending me and hearing their stories. That's, again, that kind of blending. If you friend me on Facebook, you're going to get my writing stuff, but you're probably going to also see, pictures of my grandkids and stuff like that, so
love
that
it.
blends together. But those are, I'm on Twitter and stuff like that too. But if you look for J. Scott Savage, I don't go by Jeff, because there is a Jeff Savage who has written a bunch of kids' sports books. And so just so that's not confusing, but if you search for J. Scott Savage, you'll find all my books. If you want my adult books, those are under Jeffrey S. Savage.
Got it. Fantastic. And please give our love to Jennifer. I have to share one last quick thing that has stuck with me. I was teaching, and I'm teaching there too, at the LDS Storymakers Conference. It's a big conference, like 600-700 people. It's huge. And they asked people to go up on the stage and share one word that was meaningful. And I will never forget. Everyone's going, joyful or successful or whatever. And you got up and you said, there is only one word. There has only ever been one word. And that to make me a success. And that is Jennifer. So give her our love. She's been with us in spirit.
I totally will. Thanks so much. Thanks,
all right, take care. And remember, join us for more Balance Redefined Radio. You can subscribe below, and you can also check out more episodes. And remember, make this year your year to get balance redefined.